In the heart of Mesoamerica, a losing team's fate wasn't just defeat, it was death. In ancient Rome, tens of thousands screamed for blood as swords clashed and lions roared. But these weren't just games. They were rituals, punishments, performances of power. Why did these deadly games exist? And what happened to them? Let me take you back to a time when sports weren't about trophies or sponsorships. They were about life and death. Imagine standing at the edge of a stone court under the blazing sun, surrounded by towering walls carved with sacred symbols. This was no ordinary field. This was the arena for Paktapak, the ballgame of the Maya and other Mesoamerican civilizations. The rules were strange. No hands allowed, only hips, elbows, and knees. The ball was a heavy, solid piece of rubber, capable of shattering bones if struck the wrong way. Teams trained for years, not just to win, but to survive. At one end of the court, mounted high on the wall, was a stone ring. The objective: get the ball through that narrow hoop. It was nearly impossible, and yet the moment it happened, the match could end instantly. And that's when things got really serious. See, this wasn't just sport, it was sacrifice. There's still debate over whether it was the winners or the losers who were offered to the gods, but either way, blood was expected. Some murals suggest the victorious team was honored through death, a sacred offering to keep the universe in balance. Others hint it was the losers who paid the price. Regardless, the line between athlete and sacrifice was terrifyingly thin. Spectators didn't cheer like fans. They participated in a cosmic drama. They watched in awe, not because of the skill on display, but because they believed this game was reenacting celestial myths, a battle between light and darkness. To them, each bounce of the ball echoed the movements of the sun, the moon, the very forces that govern the world. And when someone died at the end of the game, it wasn't a loss. It was divine fulfillment. This was entertainment woven tightly with belief, blood, and the survival of the cosmos itself. Now travel forward in time, and over to the Roman Empire. The roar of the crowd doesn't fade, it intensifies. The Colosseum rises like a monstrous stone beast in the center of Rome, capable of swallowing more than 50,000 people. It wasn't just an arena, it was a declaration of power, a temple to spectacle. And the shows inside weren't simply contests, they were carefully crafted performances of dominance. Gladiators fought in pairs or groups, sometimes man against man, other times against wild beasts dragged from the furthest reaches of the empire. Bears from the forests of Germania, lions from Africa, elephants from India, all paraded before the masses like living trophies of conquest. Some days the arena would flood to stage full-scale naval battles, complete with ships and actors drowning before the eyes of a stunned audience. Other times, myths were reenacted with a fatal twist, like the story of Orpheus, where a man would play his lyre before being mauled by a bear in front of a silent, then euphoric crowd. But nothing gripped Roman hearts like the gladiators. They were slaves, prisoners, and volunteers trained to fight, bleed, and sometimes die for the amusement of the crowd and the glory of the state. But they weren't faceless victims. Many became icons. Their names were whispered in markets, painted on walls, even etched into jewelry. Flamma, for instance, was offered his freedom 4 times. And each time, he refused. He chose the arena, chose the risk, chose to live and die where the people could see him. Because in the sand, he wasn't a nameless slave, he was a legend. The emperor would watch from above, wrapped in purple and surrounded by senators. A flick of his hand could spare a life or doom it. And when the crowd roared, it wasn't just for the blood, it was for the theater, the emotion, the raw power of seeing a man fight against death and either fall or rise immortal in their memory. The Colosseum wasn't just a stage. It was a message. Rome decides who dies, and Rome decides what matters. But deadly games weren't exclusive to Rome or Mesoamerica. In ancient Greece, where poetry and philosophy, the Colosseum didn't whisper power. It screamed it, rising from the center of Rome like a stone titan. It was more than just a building. It was a message carved in limestone and blood. Tens of thousands packed its towering stands, not just for entertainment, but for something deeper, something darker. When the emperor took his seat, cloaked in imperial purple, every eye turned toward the sand below. What happened there wasn't sport. It was theater, sacrifice, and social control disguised as spectacle. Gladiators emerged from shadowed archways, some bare-chested and scarred, others armored in exotic gear designed for specific roles. The Murmillo, with his broad helmet and short sword, moved like a brawler. The retiarius, armed only with a net and trident, danced like a fisherman hunting sharks. Each fight was carefully arranged, not too chaotic, not too predictable. The goal was tension, drama, and above all, control. A good fight ended with one man on his knees, his fate hanging in the air as the crowd turned their thumbs, and the emperor, cool and distant, made his decision. But here's the twist. These weren't mindless prisoners forced to die. Many gladiators were slaves, yes, but some were volunteers. Men who chose this life for a shot at fame, money, and freedom. Flamma, one of the most famous, was offered his release 4 times. He refused. For times, the arena had made him a star. Outside, he was nobody. Inside, he was a living god. The crowd chanted his name, children mimicked his movements, women wore amulets with his face etched in bronze. Death, to him, was worth the adoration. And then there were the executions. They weren't tacked onto the games. They were part of them. Intermissions weren't for snacks. They were for killing. Criminals, deserters, and political enemies were paraded into the arena for public justice. Some were thrown to wild animals in cruel reenactments of mythic stories. Others were made to fight each other, unarmed and hopeless, while the crowd howled for a quick end or a longer, more painful one. The message was loud and clear. Rome decides who dies and how. Even the animals had their own choreography. Lions, leopards, bears, rhinos, imported at great expense, were star attractions, not just because they were exotic, but because they were a reminder. Rome was so powerful, it could drag the wilderness into submission and make it dance for its pleasure. And if the beast didn't perform, no problem. That was part of the fun. Watching chaos erupt, then watching trained fighters tame it. But behind the noise and blood, the games served something colder. They were a pressure valve. A way to distract, pacify, and control a restless population. Bread and circuses, the saying went, feed the people and entertain them, and they'll forget everything else. And for a time it worked. The Colosseum became the beating heart of an empire that fed on dominance. But it couldn't last forever. Somewhere beneath the roar of the crowd, you could hear the cracks forming. Gladiators dying young, animals going extinct. The cost in money and lives rising year after year. And still, the people came because the games weren't just tradition. They were a mirror, a bloody, dazzling reflection of what Rome thought power should look like. And while Rome's empire stretched across continents, another ancient civilization was playing a very different kind of deadly game, one with gods, myths, and a rubber ball that could kill you. The sun scorched the sand as 2 men faced each other in silence. There were no shields between them, no swords, no referees, just bare skin, clenched fists, and the knowledge that only one of them would walk away unbroken. This was pankration, the ancient Greek fighting style that blurred the line between combat and survival. It wasn't just a sport. It was a crucible, a raw test of strength, technique, and sheer willpower. Introduced into the Olympic Games in 648 BC, pankration quickly became a favorite, not just for its intensity, but for its philosophy. The Greeks believed in arete, excellence in body, mind, and spirit. And to them, a pankration fighter embodied that perfectly. He had to be clever, disciplined, and unflinchingly brutal. The rules were simple. No biting, no eye gouging. Everything else? Fighters punched, kicked, choked, dislocated, and snapped limbs to get the upper hand. Some bouts lasted minutes. Others dragged on until both men collapsed, bleeding into the dust. Victory came not through a score, but through surrender, unconsciousness, or death. These weren't chaotic bar brawls. They were finely tuned performances. Fighters trained for years in specialized palaestry, conditioning their bodies like stone. They studied leverage, breathing, rhythm. Some knew how to shatter a collarbone with one movement. Others mastered chokes that would make a man go limp in seconds. When they stepped into the arena, it was with poise and an eerie calm. Crowds packed the stadiums. They didn't flinch at the blood or broken bones. They admired it, because for them, pain wasn't something to avoid, it was something noble to endure. A good pancratius didn't just win. He suffered with dignity, and when he triumphed, it was as if he had conquered something far greater than an opponent. He had mastered himself. And then there were the legends, like Arician of Phigalia, who, during a chokehold, dislocated his opponent's toe and forced a submission moments after dying from the choke. His lifeless body was crowned the victor. Or Polydamas of Scydessa, who was so powerful, it was said he killed a lion with his bare hands. Whether the stories were true or mythologized didn't matter. What mattered was that Pancration fighters became heroes, not in spite of the brutality, but because of it. In the vast palaces of ancient China, where silk rustled through gilded halls and mandarins whispered beneath painted eaves, another kind of deadly game unfolded, one that prized elegance as much as efficiency, silence as much as strength. Here, martial arts weren't just techniques of defense. They were disciplines of the body, spirit, and mind, crafted over centuries, honed like calligraphy, and sometimes turned into life-or-death spectacle. Picture a courtyard bathed in early morning mist. A man moves alone, slow, fluid, precise. His limbs trace invisible arcs through the air, like poetry made flesh. This is Taolu, a martial routine, part of a tradition that predates the Qin dynasty. But don't be fooled by its beauty. Every graceful movement hides a kill. Every stance, a strike. Across China, martial arts developed not just as survival tools, but as moral philosophies. Taoist monks studied wushu alongside meditations on balance and nature. Shaolin monks combined Buddhism with brutal combat drills, forging their bodies into weapons through pain, discipline, and repetition. But while much of Chinese martial tradition was about self-control, honor, and inner strength, it had its darker edge too, especially when power demanded blood. In the imperial courts, warriors were sometimes summoned to fight for the emperor's amusement. These duels weren't part of military training. They were performances, often staged in palace arenas or private banquets. The emperor might sit, sipping wine, as two masters clashed before him. And depending on the mood, the fight might end with one man gasping on marble tiles. But even more chilling were the public death matches during the Warring States period and beyond. Some rulers used leitai, raised platforms, where challengers would mount the stage to test their skills, sometimes to injury, sometimes to death. These weren't common by modern standards, but in times of instability or war, violence became currency. Spectacle was propaganda, and fear? That was policy. Yet the Chinese world of combat was never just raw brutality. It was a layered universe of rival schools, secret techniques, coded language, and legendary masters. One school might teach the explosive speed of Chongquan, another the deceptive softness of Baguazhang. Tales spread of fighters who could stop a heart with one palm or leap across rooftops like ghosts. Were they real? Maybe not. But they were believed, and belief, in ancient China, was power. And beyond the battlefield and the court, martial displays became part of festivals and rites. Dancers twirled with swords in hand. Acrobats kicked and spun before crowds. These weren't games in the Western sense, but performances where skill and danger intertwined, celebrating control over chaos, art over death. Even today, echoes of those traditions live on. In modern kung fu schools, in ceremonial wushu competitions, in stage fights and cinema. But the roots run deep, deeper than most realize. Because once, long ago, a misstep in a routine didn't just lose you a point. It could cost you your life. Now, from the stillness of Chinese gardens to the noise of modern stadiums, we approach the final piece of the puzzle. What happened to all these deadly games? Why did some vanish, while others evolved or went underground? And in a world where spectacle still rules, are they truly gone at all? Today, the arenas are cleaner, the crowds are bigger, and the blood is mostly fake. But the spirit of the ancient games? It's still here, just wearing a different face. We don't throw prisoners to lions anymore, but we pack stadiums to watch bodies collide at terrifying speeds. We don't offer hearts to the gods atop pyramids, but we worship athletes like deities, track their every move, and cheer when they push themselves to the edge of human endurance. Somewhere along the line, the knife was traded for a whistle, the sword for a ball. Yet the craving for spectacle never left. Some games died because they had to. Cultures changed. Religions shifted. Empires fell. Ritual sacrifices and gladiatorial duels became crimes instead of customs. But others adapted. Japanese martial arts transformed into structured disciplines. Chinese kung fu became a cinematic legend. Even wrestling, once deadly in Norse and Greek circles, is now choreographed entertainment. But maybe that's the point. We never really abandoned the games, we refined them. Turned chaos into choreography, violence into sport. We kept the rules but removed the blood, or at least most of it. And buried deep in our fascination with combat, risk, and ritual is a truth as old as civilization itself. We've always wanted to watch, to test, to compete, and sometimes to survive. Because while the arenas changed, we never really left them.